The first thing I noticed wasn't the ultrasound screen. It wasn't the soft hum of the machine, or the cold gel spreading across my belly, or even the faint black and white flicker that had become the most comforting sight of my life over the last few months. It was the doctor's hands. They were shaking. Not violently, not enough for anyone to call attention to it out loud. Just a subtle tremor, the kind you only notice when you're already tuned in, when your instincts are whispering that something isn't right. Her fingers hovered over my chart instead of the monitor. She wasn't looking at my baby. She wasn't smiling the way every other doctor had smiled during every other appointment. She was staring at the paperwork. I followed her gaze, confused. My name, my date of birth, the usual boxes and codes I never really paid attention to. And then I saw what she was fixated on. My husband's name, printed neatly at the top of the page. Grant Mercer. Her jaw tightened. She swallowed. Then, without warning, she reached out and turned the ultrasound monitor off. Just like that. Mid-exam, the screen went black. The room fell silent. The sudden absence of sound felt violent, like someone had yanked the air out of my lungs. My heart slammed so hard against my ribs that I could hear it in my ears. For half a second, my mind refused to process what had just happened. No, I blurted out, my voice too loud in the small room. Wait, what's wrong? Is something wrong with the baby? She didn't answer right away. She set the wand down carefully, almost reverently, like it might break if she moved too fast. Then she finally looked at me, really looked at me, and the expression on her face made my stomach drop. Fear. Not clinical concern. Not professional seriousness. Fear. Mrs. Mercer, she said quietly, her voice lower than it had been moments ago. I need to speak with you privately, right now. My mouth went dry. I tried to sit up too quickly, panic flooding my body in one hot wave. Images crashed through my mind all at once. No heartbeat, abnormal development, a missed diagnosis. Every nightmare scenario you secretly carry when you're pregnant came rushing to the surface, clawing for attention. I'm alone, I said, my hands gripping the edges of the exam table. My husband couldn't make it today. Please, just tell me. She didn't let me finish. She helped me off the table, handed me a paper towel to wipe the gel from my stomach, and guided me toward the door. Her hand hovered near my elbow without quite touching, like she was afraid I might shatter if she applied too much pressure. We walked down the short hallway to her office. She opened the door, stepped inside, then closed it behind us, and locked it. The sound of the lock clicking into place echoed far louder than it should have. My chest tightened. I couldn't breathe properly. My vision narrowed, the edges blurring as adrenaline surged through me. Please, I whispered, just tell me what's happening. She took a deep breath, like someone bracing before jumping into icy water. Then she spoke. You need to leave your husband, she said. Today, before you go home. The words didn't make sense. I stared at her, waiting for the rest of the sentence, waiting for the explanation that would make them fit into reality. None came. What? I laughed, a sharp, brittle sound that didn't feel like it came from me at all. I'm sorry, I think you're confused. We're married. I'm pregnant. We're fine. Her expression didn't change. You need to contact a divorce lawyer first, she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. Before you confront him, before he realizes you know anything. It is what's of they. I laughed again. Louder this time, hysteria creeping in. This isn't funny. If something's wrong with my baby, you have to tell me. You can't just... This isn't about your baby, she said gently. That stopped me cold. The room felt too small, the walls too close. I suddenly became painfully aware of every sound, the hum of the air conditioner, the faint voices of nurses down the hall, my own uneven breathing. Then what is it about? I asked. She looked down at the folder on her desk. Her hands were still shaking as she opened it. It's about your husband, she said. And what he's done. A chill ran through me, sharp and immediate. What do you mean? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she closed her eyes for a brief moment, like she was steadying herself. When she opened them again, her gaze was steady, resolved. What I'm about to show you, she said carefully, is going to change everything you think you know about your marriage. My heart pounded harder. A strange, irrational part of me wanted to laugh it off, to dismiss it as some misunderstanding, some mistake that would be cleared up in minutes. That part of me clung desperately to the idea that my life was still intact. But another part of me, the part that had noticed the late nights, the phone turned face down, the sudden urgency around my finances, was already bracing for impact. "I need you to understand something," she continued. "I wouldn't be doing this if I weren't absolutely certain. And I wouldn't be risking my career if I didn't believe you were in danger." "In danger?" I repeated, my voice barely audible. She nodded. "Not physically," she said, "but legally, financially, emotionally." My hands instinctively moved to my belly. 4 months pregnant, vulnerable in a way I'd never been before. "You're scaring me," I said. "I know," she replied softly. "I'm sorry, but you need to see this now. Before he has any idea, you've been warned." She slid the folder across the desk toward me. I stared at it, my pulse roaring in my ears. A few minutes ago, I'd walked into that exam room expecting another routine ultrasound, another grainy picture to tuck into my purse, another small reassurance that my baby was growing, that my life was moving forward exactly the way it was supposed to. I had no idea that in this locked office, with a stranger's trembling hands and a manila folder between us, my entire world was about to collapse. And I had no idea yet that the fire had been set by the man sleeping next to me every single night. My name is Daphne Wilson. I'm 32 years old, 4 months pregnant, and until the last hour of my life, I thought I understood exactly who I was and where I came from. Sitting in that locked office, staring at a folder I hadn't opened yet, my mind did what it always does when reality feels too big to face. It ran backward. It searched for context, for beginnings, for the version of my life that still made sense. People like to say I come from old money, usually in a lowered voice, like it's something impolite to acknowledge directly. The truth is simpler and far less glamorous. My grandmother, Eleanor Wilson, worked her entire life to build stability, not excess. She invested carefully, lived modestly, and believed deeply in one idea above all others, that money should be a safety net, not a personality. When she passed away 5 years ago, she left me her estate about $3 million in a trust and the Wilson family home. A big, creaky, beautiful house in Connecticut where 5 generations of women had lived, argued, reconciled, raised children, and buried loved ones. I never felt entitled to it. If anything, I felt responsible for it. I didn't change how I lived after the inheritance. I kept my job as a marketing director at a small boutique firm. I drove my 10-year-old Subaru until the check engine light became a permanent fixture. I bought my coffee at the same place every morning and wore the same winter coat until the lining started to tear. The money meant security. It meant breathing room. It meant I'd never be trapped in a bad job or a worse relationship because I couldn't afford to leave. At least, that's what I believed. What no one tells you is that quiet wealth is often more dangerous than flashy wealth. When you don't advertise it, when you don't wrap it in obvious signals, it becomes something people feel entitled to uncover, something they hunt for. And I was hunted long before I ever realized it. I met Grant Mercer 4 years ago at my family's annual charity gala. The Wilsons had hosted it for decades, long before I was born. That year, I was standing at the bar, doing my best to escape a man who'd managed to ask about my financial situation within 3 minutes of being introduced. I was exhausted by it, by the thinly veiled curiosity. By the way, some people's eyes changed the moment they thought they'd identified what I was worth. Then Grant appeared. He was tall, well-dressed without looking flashy, with dark hair and an easy smile that made him seem relaxed in a room full of donors and social climbers. He asked what I was drinking, made a joke about the terrible jazz band, complained about the acoustics. He didn't mention money, didn't ask about my work, my family, or the house we were standing in. Instead, he asked what book I was reading and actually listened to the answer. At the time, it felt like relief. He said he was a financial advisor who'd gotten a last-minute invitation from a colleague, claimed he had no idea who the Wilson family was before he arrived. I remember laughing, telling him he'd picked quite a night to wander in unprepared. He laughed too, easy and unbothered. Looking back now, sitting in that doctor's office with my pulse racing, I can see it clearly. A financial advisor who doesn't research the host family of a major charity event isn't charming. He's lying. That should have been my first red flag. But when you want something to be true badly enough, you don't interrogate it. You accept it gratefully. We started dating soon after. Grant was attentive in ways that felt almost old-fashioned. He remembered small things I mentioned in passing, my favorite kind of tea, the fact that I hated loud restaurants, the story about my grandmother teaching me how to garden when I was 10. He insisted on paying for dinners even though I could have covered the bill 10 times over. He framed it as pride, not control. "Let me do this," he'd say, smiling. "I like taking care of you." I believed him. My mother didn't. The first time she met Grant, she was polite, warm even, but the moment he left, she pulled me aside. "That man's smile doesn't reach his eyes," she said quietly. "Something about him is wrong." I snapped back harder than I should have, told her she was being paranoid, that she didn't trust anyone, that she was projecting her own fears onto my happiness. We argued like we hadn't since I was a teenager. Over time, the arguments turned into tension. The tension turned into distance. Eventually, we stopped talking about Grant altogether. Then we stopped talking, period. 2 years of near silence, birthday texts, holiday messages with no warmth behind them, all because I chose to believe the man I loved over the woman who raised me. Grant proposed after a year of dating, a beautiful ring, a carefully chosen moment. I said yes without hesitation. We married at my grandmother's estate, under trees she'd planted decades earlier. Grant cried during his vows, tears streaming down his face as he promised to love and protect me forever. I thought it was devotion. I thought I was lucky. Now, sitting in a locked office with a stranger about to hand me proof that my life was built on lies, I understood those tears differently. They weren't from joy. They were from relief. Because Grant Mercer hadn't stumbled into my life by accident. He'd found me. After the wedding, everything moved quickly, the way it always does when you believe you've finally found solid ground. We settled into married life at my grandmother's house, the same one that had held generations of Wilson women before me. Grant loved to tell people how honored he felt to live there, how meaningful it was to be part of such a legacy. At the time, I thought he was being respectful. Now I hear the calculation in every one of those words. For the first year, he played the role perfectly. Attentive husband, thoughtful partner, the kind of man who brought home flowers for no reason and remembered anniversaries without reminders. He asked about my day, listened when I talked about work, nodded along when I rambled about campaigns and clients. He made coffee for me in the mornings and kissed my forehead before leaving for the office. From the outside, we looked like one of those couples people secretly envy. My mother was the only one who never relaxed around him. She kept her distance after the wedding, polite but reserved whenever we were in the same room. I noticed it, of course, but I told myself it was pride. That she didn't like losing her place in my life. That she was struggling to accept that I didn't need her the way I used to. Every time Grant's name came up, her expression tightened just enough for me to catch it. "You're reading too much into things," I told her once, sharper than I meant to be. "He loves me. He treats me well. That should be enough." She looked at me for a long moment, like she was memorizing my face. "I hope you're right," she said. "I really do." I wish I'd understood then what that meant. We started trying for a baby about a year into the marriage. At first, it was lighthearted, no pressure, just the quiet excitement of possibility. Months passed. Nothing happened. I told myself it was normal. That stress played a role. That timing mattered. Grant assured me we had all the time in the world. After 2 years, we went to see a fertility specialist. The appointment felt routine until it wasn't. Tests were run, charts reviewed, numbers explained. The doctor cleared his throat in that careful way doctors do when they're about to deliver news that will land like a punch. Grant had severe male factor infertility. His sperm count was almost non-existent, and what little was present barely moved. Natural conception, we were told gently, was essentially impossible. Grant broke down in the car afterward. He gripped the steering wheel, his shoulders shaking as tears spilled down his face. He apologized over and over, his voice cracking as he told me he felt like he'd failed me as a husband, that he'd failed us. I reached across the console and held his hand, telling him none of it mattered, that we were a team, that there were options. I meant every word. What I didn't know was that those tears weren't grief. They were panic. Because for the first time since meeting me, Grant's carefully constructed plan had hit a complication he hadn't anticipated. IVF was our next step. The doctor explained the process, the timelines, the odds. Grant listened intently, asked detailed questions, took notes. He insisted on researching clinics himself, said he wanted the best possible care, that he didn't trust just anyone with something this important. I was emotionally drained, raw from disappointment and hope tangled together, so I let him take the lead. He found the clinic, handled the paperwork, coordinated appointments. I told myself I was lucky to have such a supportive partner. The first IVF cycle failed. I took it harder than I expected. I stayed in bed for days, staring at the ceiling, feeling like my body had betrayed me. Grant lay beside me, holding me while I cried. He whispered encouragement, promised we'd try again, promised it would work next time. He sounded so certain, so calm, that it steadied me. The second cycle worked. 7 months before the day I sat in that locked office, staring at a folder that threatened to destroy everything, I stared at a pregnancy test with 2 unmistakable pink lines. I cried. I laughed. I pressed my hand to my stomach like that tiny gesture could protect something I couldn't even feel yet. Grant hugged me tightly, his hands warm on my back, already talking about nursery colors and baby names. He was radiant. Looking back, that should have scared me. A few weeks later, he mentioned casually that I should update my will now that we were starting a family. It's just practical, he said. Responsible. I smiled, touched by what I thought was foresight. He asked questions about my trust, about how things would work if something happened to me during childbirth. Just in case, he said, for the baby. I didn't see the trap forming around me. I didn't hear the quiet clicking of pieces falling into place. As my pregnancy progressed, the atmosphere in our marriage shifted in ways I couldn't quite explain. Grant became more guarded. His phone was always face down. He changed his password, took calls outside late at night, claiming it was work. He stayed at the office longer, came home tired and distracted. When I asked questions, he brushed them off. When I pressed, he sighed and told me I was being paranoid. Blamed the hormones, blamed pregnancy anxiety. He said my mother had warned him about this, about women becoming irrational when they were expecting, and I believed him. I apologized for doubting him. I swallowed my discomfort. I told myself marriage required trust, that I was being unfair, that love meant giving him the benefit of the doubt. All the while, my mother watched from a distance, waiting. By the time I lay on that exam table, 4 months pregnant, waiting to see my baby on the screen, the foundation of my life was already cracked. I just didn't know it yet. And the man I had defended against every warning, every instinct, every quiet voice telling me something was wrong, was about to be exposed as the one who lit the fuse. Once the shock of that positive pregnancy test settled into something like reality, life moved into a new rhythm. Appointments, vitamins, books stacked on my nightstand about fetal development and birthing plans. I downloaded apps that told me the baby was the size of a blueberry, then a lime, then an avocado. Each milestone felt like a small victory after 2 years of waiting and disappointment. Grant leaned into the role of expectant father with enthusiasm that felt reassuring at first. He came with me to the early appointments, asked questions, nodded seriously while doctors explained things I barely understood myself. He talked about the nursery constantly, soft colors, neutral tones, something calming. He started bookmarking furniture online, sending me links during the day with messages like, "Times, what do you think about this crib?" Asterisk or times. This would look great in the corner by the window. On the surface, it looked like excitement. But underneath, something had shifted. It was subtle at first, the kind of change you feel before you can explain it. Grant began handling more and more of the logistics without asking. He insisted on managing the insurance paperwork, said he didn't want me stressed. He volunteered to keep track of appointments, medications, invoices. I told myself it was support, that I was lucky to have a partner who wanted to shoulder the burden. The first IVF cycle had failed, and that failure had left me fragile in ways I didn't fully understand until later. When the second cycle worked, when my body finally did what I'd been hoping it would do for so long, I felt grateful to the point of blindness. I didn't question the man who held me while I cried. I didn't scrutinize the one who told me everything would be okay. 7 months earlier, when we found out the second cycle had worked, Grant cried again. This time, the tears felt different. Less raw, more controlled. He wiped his face quickly, hugged me tightly, and started talking immediately about the future. He sounded almost relieved. That should have stood out to me. A few weeks into the pregnancy, he made a comment that felt odd but harmless at the time. We were sitting at the kitchen table, dinner dishes pushed aside, when he said, "You should probably update your will." I looked up from my tea, surprised. "My will?" "Yeah," he said easily. "Now that we're a family. It's just practical, especially with your trust. If anything happened to you during delivery, I'd need to be able to access funds for the baby." The words landed softly, wrapped in concern. I nodded slowly, touched by what I thought was responsibility. "That makes sense," I said. "We can talk to a lawyer." He smiled, satisfied, and reached across the table to squeeze my hand. At the time, it felt like teamwork, like planning. What I didn't realize was that he wasn't thinking about times if something happened to me. He was thinking about times when asterisk. As my pregnancy progressed, Grant's focus on money intensified, not in obvious ways, in careful, reasonable-sounding suggestions. Power of attorney, being added to the trust temporarily, selling my grandmother's house because it was too big and impractical for a baby, investing the proceeds more aggressively. "I know exactly which funds would maximize returns," he said one night, scrolling through his phone. "We could really set our child up for life." I hesitated. The house wasn't just property. It was history. My grandmother's presence lingered in every room. I told him I wasn't ready to even think about selling it. The warmth in his eyes cooled almost instantly. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He simply leaned back in his chair and went quiet. That silence stretched for hours, then days. He slept on the far edge of the bed, claiming I moved too much now that I was pregnant. When I tried to talk about it, he sighed heavily and said I was being emotional, that pregnancy hormones were making me clingy and difficult. I started to apologize for needing reassurance, for asking questions, for feeling unsettled. That was when the late nights began. Grant started coming home later and later, sometimes not until midnight. He said work was intense, that clients were restructuring portfolios, that he had to be available. I didn't know much about finance, but I knew enough to wonder why any of that required phone calls at 11 p.m. on a Saturday. When I mentioned it, he smiled tiredly and kissed my forehead. "Tokyo markets," he joked. "Different time zone." I laughed weakly, wanting to believe him. Then I found the receipts. A restaurant downtown I'd never been to, $280 for dinner for two, a hotel 40 minutes from our house. When I asked why he needed a hotel room so close to home, he didn't miss a beat. "Conference ran late," he said, "didn't want to drive exhausted." The answers came too quickly, too smoothly, like they'd been rehearsed. When I pushed harder, his tone shifted. "Daphne, you're being paranoid. This is exactly what your mother warned me about. Pregnancy messes with your head. Please don't turn into one of those wives." The shame hit immediately, hot and heavy. I backed down, apologized for doubting him, told myself I was being unfair. Physically, he pulled away too. He barely touched me anymore, claimed he was afraid of hurting the baby. It sounded caring on the surface, but it felt like rejection deep in my bones. I told myself it was temporary, that things would go back to normal. One night, I woke up around 2 in the morning and realized Grant wasn't in bed. I found him in the kitchen, hunched over his phone, speaking in a low voice. "It's almost time," he said. "By spring, everything will be settled." When he saw me, he hung up instantly. "Work emergency," he said. "Go back to sleep, honey." I stood there for a moment, my heart pounding, then did exactly what he wanted. I went back to bed. By the time I lay on that exam table, 4 months pregnant, cold gel on my belly, waiting to see my baby on the screen, my life already felt slightly off balance, like a picture frame hanging crooked on the wall. You notice it, but you keep telling yourself it's nothing. Then the screen went dark, and everything I'd been ignoring rushed forward all at once, demanding to be seen. By the time my second trimester settled in, the unease I'd been carrying stopped feeling temporary. It stopped feeling like a phase. It became a constant hum beneath everything else, like a noise you only notice once the room goes quiet. Nothing in my life was obviously falling apart, and that somehow made it worse. From the outside, everything looked perfect. Pregnant wife, successful husband, beautiful home, the kind of life people congratulated you for. Inside, I felt like I was walking on glass. Grant's phone never left his hand anymore. When it did, it was always face down. A small thing, an insignificant thing, I told myself. Plenty of people do that. Still, I noticed when he changed his password. Not because he told me, but because one night I went to check the weather on his phone while mine was charging, and the screen asked for a code I didn't recognize. He laughed when I mentioned it. I updated my security, he said. Work requirement. Then he kissed my cheek and changed the subject before I could ask another question. The calls continued. Late. Quiet. Always taken outside or in the bathroom with the door closed. When he came back, he'd be distracted, already halfway into another conversation he didn't invite me into. Client stuff, he said. You wouldn't find it interesting. The phrase lodged itself in my chest. You wouldn't find it interesting. It wasn't just that he was hiding something, it was that he was deciding, for me, what I was allowed to know. His time at the office stretched longer and longer. 3 nights a week, sometimes 4. Midnight became normal. When I asked why a financial advisor needed hospital surgeon hours, he sighed like a man exhausted by unreasonable demands. This is how it is right now, he said. I'm doing this for us, for the baby. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. Then the money conversations escalated. At first, they sounded responsible, sensible, protective. What if something happens during delivery? He asked one evening, his voice carefully concerned. I'd need access to funds to take care of the baby. That's just common sense, he suggested, power of attorney, being added to my trust. Temporary, he said, just until things settled. When I hesitated, he reframed it immediately. Unless you don't trust me, he added lightly. The words hit harder than they should have. Trust, marriage, baby. He stacked them together until refusing him felt like rejecting the entire foundation of our life. I told him I needed time to think. He nodded, smiled, and then withdrew. No argument, no fight, just distance. He slept on the far edge of the bed, claiming I tossed and turned too much, now that I was pregnant. He stopped reaching for me in the mornings, stopped kissing me goodbye. When I tried to talk about it, he told me I was being needy, emotional, hormonal. You're imagining problems that aren't there, he said. My mother warned me this could happen. That stung more than I expected. He said it casually, like a fact, not an insult, like I was a textbook case. I apologized for pushing. I apologized for doubting him. I apologized for feeling lonely in my own marriage. That was the moment I should have listened to myself. The receipts came next. I found them by accident, stuffed into the pocket of a jacket he rarely wore. A restaurant downtown. Expensive. $280 for dinner for 2. I stared at the paper longer than necessary, my mind scrambling for explanations that didn't hurt. Client dinner, I told myself. Networking. Then I found the hotel receipt. A room booked for 1 night, a place less than an hour from our house. My stomach dropped. I waited until dinner that night, rehearsing my words so I wouldn't sound accusatory. Calm, curious, reasonable. Why did you need a hotel room so close to home? I asked. He didn't blink. Conference ran late, he said smoothly. Didn't want to drive tired. The answer came too fast, too complete, like it had been waiting. When I pressed, just a little, his expression hardened. Daphne, you're being paranoid, he said. This is exactly what I was afraid of. Pregnancy, anxiety, it's real. You should talk to your doctor about it. Shame flooded me instantly. I backed down. I told him I was sorry. I told myself I was overreacting, that I didn't want to become one of those wives who saw betrayal in every shadow. Physically, he pulled further away. He barely touched me anymore, blamed my changing body, said he didn't want to hurt the baby. It sounded thoughtful. It felt like rejection. I lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering how I could feel so alone lying next to my husband. One night, around 2 a.m, I woke up and realized the bed was empty. I found Grant in the kitchen, hunched over his phone, speaking in a voice so low it barely carried. "It's almost time," he said. "By spring, everything will be settled." My heart started pounding. I took a step forward, and the floor creaked. He turned, saw me, and hung up instantly. "Work emergency," he said. "Go back to sleep, honey." I stood there for a moment, every instinct screaming that something was wrong. Then I did what I'd been trained to do over months of subtle correction. I ignored it. The next week, my best friend Tara came over for lunch. She watched me talk, watched me excuse Grant's behavior, watched me minimize my own discomfort. Finally, she put her fork down and looked at me with an intensity that made my throat tighten. "Daphne," she said gently, "when's the last time he was actually happy to see you? Not performing, not playing a role, just happy." I couldn't answer. "Trust your gut," she said. "Something's wrong." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying everything. The phone, the money, the distance, the way he sometimes looked at me like I was a problem to solve, not a person to love. 4 months pregnant, I went to my regular OB appointment. A routine ultrasound. Grant couldn't make it. "Client meeting," he said. I lay back on the exam table, cold gel on my belly, waiting to see my baby on the screen. Instead, the doctor stared at my file and turned the monitor off. In that moment, everything I'd been pushing down surged to the surface. Every doubt, every instinct, every warning I'd ignored. I just didn't know yet how bad the truth was going to be. Dr. Brennan didn't rush me. After she slid the folder across the desk, she waited, giving me space to catch my breath, to steady the shaking in my hands. My heart was still racing from the shock of having the ultrasound screen turned off, from the words, "Times leave your husband," times still echoing in my head. I stared at the folder like it might bite me if I touched it. "I need you to hear me clearly," she said gently. "What I'm about to show you has nothing to do with your baby's health. Your pregnancy is progressing normally." Relief flooded me so fast it almost made me dizzy. My baby was okay. Whatever else was about to happen, at least that part of my life was still intact. I pressed a hand to my stomach, grounding myself. "Then why?" My voice cracked. "Why are you telling me to get a divorce?" She took a deep breath. "Because your husband committed a serious crime, and he committed it against you." The words landed slowly, like stones sinking into water. Crime. Against me. I shook my head, already trying to reject the idea. "That doesn't make any sense," I said. "Grant would never." "I know this is hard to hear," she interrupted softly. "But please, just listen." She opened the folder. Inside were documents that looked clinical and official in a way that made my skin prickle. Clinic records, lab notes, payment logs, email printouts. She turned the folder so I could see everything clearly, then folded her hands together, still trembling slightly. "My younger sister works as a nurse at the fertility clinic you and your husband used," she said. 3 weeks ago, she came to me in the middle of the night. She was crying so hard she could barely speak. I swallowed, my throat tight. 7 months ago," Dr. Brennan continued, "a patient's husband approached her at work. Charming, polite, well-dressed. He told her he had a special situation that required discretion. A chill crawled up my spine. He said his wife didn't know," she said, watching my face carefully. "He claimed there was a genetic issue on his side of the family, something he didn't want to burden her with. He told my sister he was planning to use donor sperm for their IVF cycle and just needed help keeping it quiet." My ears started ringing. "No," I whispered. That's not possible." "He offered her $30,000, Dr. Brennan said. My sister was making $52,000 a year and drowning in student loan debt. She knew it was wrong, but she was desperate." The room tilted. I grabbed the edge of the desk to steady myself. "She helped switch the samples," Dr. Brennan said quietly. Your husband's sperm was replaced with donor sperm. The embryologist was paid separately. Between them, they made sure the switch went undetected. I stared at the papers, the words blurring together. Donor, switch, paid, fraud. My mind struggled to keep up. You're saying, I forced myself to finish the sentence, you're saying the baby I'm carrying is yours, she said firmly, and completely innocent. But biologically, no, your husband is not the father. The world seemed to go silent. I could hear my own breathing, loud and uneven. I felt sick, not because of the pregnancy, but because of the implication hanging in the air. Why would he do that? I asked. Why would he go through all of this? Dr. Brennan's expression tightened because this was only the first part of his plan. She turned another page in the folder. He knew that once the baby was born, a DNA test would prove he wasn't the biological father, she said, and he planned to use that. Images flashed through my mind. Grant talking about framing DNA results in the nursery, his casual comments about proof of fatherhood. My chest tightened painfully. He was going to accuse you of cheating, she continued. He would frame himself as the betrayed husband. According to your prenuptial agreement, infidelity triggers significant financial penalties. $500,000, the number screamed through my head. He planned to say you'd conceive naturally after the IVF cycle failed, Dr. Brennan said. He intended to have the clinic records altered after the birth to support that narrative. I felt cold all over. He would have everything he needed, she said. Medical records, DNA results, a public story that painted you as unfaithful. And I would have believed him, I whispered. She nodded. Most people would. I flipped through the documents with shaking hands. There were payment records linked to accounts Grant controlled, email exchanges between him and the embryologist, carefully worded but damning when read together. Original lab records showing the switch. My sister saved everything, Dr. Brennan said. She couldn't live with herself otherwise. Something inside me fractured and hardened at the same time. He spent $50,000, Dr. Brennan added, her voice heavy, to set you up, to destroy your reputation, to take your money. $50,000, more than our wedding, more than our honeymoon. A sick, bitter laugh bubbled up in my chest and died before it reached my throat. There's more, she said gently. Of course there was. He's deeply in debt, she continued. Gambling debts, online poker, sports betting, casino trips disguised as conferences. The money he used for the bribes was embezzled from his own clients. My mind snapped pieces together with horrifying clarity. The late nights, the hotel rooms, the urgency around my trust. He wasn't just trying to profit, she said. He was drowning, and you were his way out. I sat there for a long time, the papers spread out in front of me, my entire life rearranging itself in my head. The man I'd loved, the marriage I'd defended, the mother I'd pushed away because she saw what I refused to see. Shock came first, then disbelief, then something colder. He thinks I'm stupid, I said quietly. Dr. Brennan didn't argue. He thinks I'll crumble, I went on, my voice steadying, that I'll be too ashamed to fight back, that I'll hand him whatever he wants just to make it stop. I placed a hand over my belly, feeling a faint flutter beneath my palm. My baby, innocent, unaware. He doesn't know me at all, I said. Dr. Brennan met my gaze. He doesn't know that you know. No, I agreed, closing the folder carefully. And he's not going to. I stood up, my legs trembling but my mind suddenly clear. He thinks he's been playing chess, I said, feeling something sharp and focused settle in my chest. He thinks he's 3 moves ahead. I straightened my shoulders. He has no idea I've already flipped the board. I drove home from that appointment like my life depended on it because in a way, it did. My hands were steady on the steering wheel, my face carefully neutral, my breathing measured. I kept reminding myself to blink normally, to relax my shoulders, to look like a woman who just had a routine ultrasound and nothing more. Grant had installed security cameras around the house 2 years earlier. At the time, he'd said it was for protection. Now, every red light felt like a test. I wondered if he watched the footage, if he studied my expressions the way he studied spreadsheets, if he was waiting for a crack. So I gave him nothing. When I pulled into the driveway, he was already home. standing in the kitchen with that familiar smile, the one my mother had warned me about, the smile that didn't reach his eyes. My heart thudded once. Hard. Then settled. "How was the appointment?" he asked, casual, attentive. "Everything okay with the baby?" I smiled back and walked straight into his arms. I hugged him the way I always had. I showed him the ultrasound photo Dr. Brennan had printed before everything changed. "Perfect," I said. "Everything's absolutely perfect." He exhaled, relief melting into his posture. I could feel it happen. I'd given him what he needed: reassurance, control. That night, I played my part flawlessly. I laughed at his jokes. I asked about his day. I even apologized for being paranoid lately, blaming the hormones, repeating his own words back to him. I watched the tension drain from his shoulders. He thought he was still winning. He slept soundly beside me. I didn't. I stared at the ceiling until nearly 3 a.m, my mind racing, not with panic, but with planning. The shock had burned off, leaving something colder and clearer behind. He thought I would confront him. Cry. Break. He'd built his entire scheme on that assumption. He hadn't accounted for what happens when a woman stops being afraid. The next morning, I called in sick to work. Then I packed a small bag and drove 2 hours to a different city, checking my mirrors the entire way. Paranoid, maybe. But paranoia had kept people alive long before it ever ruined a marriage. Her name was Rosalind Weaver, former police detective. 15 years on the force before going private. When I walked into her office, she took one look at me, pregnant, composed, eyes sharp with purpose, and gestured for me to sit. "Start at the beginning," she said. So I did. I told her everything. The inheritance, the marriage, the IVF, the locked office, the folder, the plan. She didn't interrupt. She didn't gasp. She took notes and nodded like a woman who'd seen variations of this story before and knew exactly how it ended. When I finished, she leaned back and smiled, not kindly, not reassuringly. It was the smile of a shark that's just spotted blood in the water. "Your husband made a lot of mistakes," she said. "Arrogant men always do. Give me 2 weeks." She had results in 10 days. Grant Mercer had $180,000 in gambling debts, online poker, sports betting, casino trips disguised as conferences. The kind of creditors who don't send polite reminders when payments are late, the kind who get creative. The embezzlement was real. $53,000 siphoned from client accounts over 18 months, small amounts, carefully spaced, hidden just well enough to avoid detection until someone went looking. Then there was the affair. 8 months. His assistant. Hotel rooms. Romantic dinners. Weekend getaways booked under business travel. Rosalind had photos, text messages, credit card receipts, the whole cliché package. I felt almost insulted by how unoriginal it was. She found something else, too. 5 years earlier, Grant had dated another woman in Boston. Caroline Ashford. Family money. Trust fund. Same pattern. He'd convinced her to open a joint account, then financial irregularities started appearing. She ended the relationship immediately, but never pressed charges, too embarrassed, too shocked. Rosalind tracked her down. Caroline didn't hesitate. She'd always regretted letting him walk away clean. While Rosalind worked, I met Molly Brennan in secret, a coffee shop an hour from town. She looked exhausted. Guilt had hollowed her out. She cried the moment she saw me. "I'm so sorry," she kept saying. "I knew it was wrong." I stopped her. "I need to know one thing," I said. "Are you willing to testify?" "Officially. Under oath." She nodded without hesitation. "I'll tell them everything." The embryologist followed quickly after that. Once he realized Molly had kept records and was cooperating, his conscience appeared right on schedule. Fear does that. He was willing to say whatever was needed to protect his license. The hardest call I made came next. My mother. 2 years of silence sat between us when she answered the phone. "Daphne?" she said cautiously, hope threading her voice. "You were right," I said, my voice breaking. "About everything, and I'm so sorry." I braced for the words she'd earned. The "I told you so," the anger, the hurt. Instead, she said, "What do you need, sweetheart?" That broke me more than anything else had. My mother is a retired attorney. Estate law. 30 years. Within 48 hours, she'd connected me with the best divorce lawyer in Connecticut and a criminal prosecutor who specialized in fraud. She taught me something that day. The people who really love you don't need to be right. They just need you to be okay. My lawyer's name was Sandra Kowalski, 5'2", silver hair, reading glasses perpetually perched on her nose. She looked like someone's sweet grandmother. She was a shark in a cardigan. She reviewed everything: clinic documents, statements, financial records, affair evidence. When she finished, she looked up and smiled. "Your husband is facing fraud, conspiracy, and embezzlement charges," she said, "and the prenup clause he planned to weaponize against you, it works in your favor now." The prosecutor agreed. A judge reviewed the evidence and issued an arrest warrant. Probable cause, no theatrics, just the quiet, devastating power of the law. 6 weeks after that ultrasound appointment, I suggested a celebration. A baby party at my grandmother's estate, both families, close friends, a garden gathering to celebrate what was coming. Grant's eyes lit up like Christmas morning. More witnesses, he thought. More sympathy later. He had no idea he was walking into his own funeral. The party was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon in late spring, the kind of day my grandmother used to love, warm without being heavy, a light breeze that carried the smell of roses through the garden. The Wilson estate looked exactly the way it always had when something important was about to happen. White tents set up on the back lawn, champagne chilling in silver buckets, a string quartet playing softly near the rose bushes. 50 guests moved through the space in linen suits and sundresses, laughing, sipping, congratulating us on the baby. Grant was in his element. That morning, I watched him through the crack in the bathroom door as he adjusted his tie in the mirror. He practiced expressions: soft smile, proud smile, emotional smile. He didn't know I was watching. He didn't know that the man he saw reflected back at him was about to disappear forever. "This is perfect," he said when he came downstairs, kissing my forehead. "Everyone's going to remember this." He had no idea how right he was. His parents arrived early, having driven up from Maryland. His mother dabbed at her eyes as soon as she saw me, one hand resting on my belly, as if she were already imagining the baby she thought would carry the Mercer name forward. His father shook hands, chest puffed out, pride radiating from him. They had no idea what kind of man they'd raised, or maybe they did, and just never wanted to see it. My own mother stood near the dessert table, calm and observant, champagne glass in hand. When our eyes met across the lawn, she gave the smallest nod. Everything was ready. Grant worked the crowd like a seasoned politician. Handshakes, backslaps, laughter timed just right. Every time someone lifted a camera, his hand slid protectively to my stomach, his face arranged into an expression of devotion so convincing it almost made me doubt myself for a split second. Almost. Around 3 o'clock, Grant did exactly what I knew he would. He'd been hinting at it for weeks, planting the idea carefully, making it seem sweet instead of suspicious. "You know what would be really special?" he said loudly, pulling me close so others could hear. "A DNA test. We could frame the results for the nursery. Proof of our bond. Proof that Daddy and baby are connected forever." A ripple of approval moved through the guests. Someone said how romantic it was. His mother pressed a handkerchief to her mouth, visibly moved. I hesitated, just enough to sell it. "I don't know," I said softly. "That seems like a lot." "Come on," he urged, smiling for the crowd. "We could even open the results here, make it part of the celebration." Encouraging murmurs rose around us. Grant's confidence grew with every second. He thought this was his moment. The trap he'd spent over a year constructing was about to snap shut, and he believed my neck was in it. I smiled. "If everyone thinks it's a good idea," I said. His eyes lit up. Victory, unmistakable and premature. Instead of reaching for a DNA kit, I walked toward the small platform near the fountain, the one meant for toasts. I picked up the microphone. The chatter quieted. Grant watched me, champagne glass in hand, already rehearsing his devastated expression for later. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice carried easily across the lawn. "Today is supposed to be about family, about truth." Grant's smile flickered. "My husband wanted to reveal something special today," I continued, "so I'm going to help him do exactly that." Silence fell like a curtain. I reached under the podium and pulled out a folder. 3 months ago, I learned something about my marriage that changed everything I thought I knew. Grant's face drained of color. We struggled with fertility, I said calmly. Grant's diagnosis meant natural conception was impossible, so we pursued IVF at a clinic he chose. I held up the first document. These are the original clinic records, before anyone altered them. A sharp intake of breath rippled through the crowd. They show that my husband bribed 2 clinic employees to switch his sperm sample with donor sperm. He paid $30,000 to a nurse. He paid the embryologist. And he paid a young man named Derek Sykes $15,000 to provide the sperm used to conceive my child without my knowledge or consent. Gasps erupted. A champagne glass shattered somewhere behind me. I gestured to the edge of the crowd. Derek stepped forward, pale but resolute. Grant's mother grabbed his father's arm, her face crumpling. My husband's plan, I continued, was to wait until our child was born, demand a DNA test, and accuse me of cheating when it proved he wasn't the biological father. I held up another document. Our prenuptial agreement includes an infidelity clause, $500,000 in penalties, loss of assets, public humiliation. Grant found his voice strained and desperate. Daphne, this is insane. You're confused. It's the pregnancy. I'm not finished, I said, my voice cutting through him like ice. In addition to committing fertility fraud, my husband embezzled approximately $50,000 from his clients to fund this scheme. I looked directly at his boss, standing frozen near the bar. He didn't look surprised, just sick. My husband also has $180,000 in gambling debts, I added, and for the past 8 months, he's been having an affair with his assistant. I displayed the photos. Not explicit, just undeniable. Grant's mother made a sound like she'd been struck. His father stared at the ground. This isn't his first attempt, I said. 5 years ago, he targeted another woman with family money. She's provided a statement and is prepared to testify. Grant's champagne glass slipped from his hand and exploded on the stone patio. This is a lie, he stammered. She's unstable. Is it true? His mother asked quietly. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Molly Brennan stepped forward. I'm the nurse he bribed, she said. I have documentation. I've given my statement to police. Then the officers emerged from the guest house, walking calmly across the lawn. Grant Mercer, one said evenly. You're under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and embezzlement. They handcuffed him in front of everyone. As they led him away, he tried one last time. Daphne, please, think about our baby. I looked at him, really looked at him. We just did, I said, and watched him disappear down the long gravel drive, the estate gates closing behind him at last. The police car disappeared down the long gravel drive, its tires crunching softly against the stones my grandmother had laid decades earlier. The iron gates closed behind it with a final, echoing clang. For a long moment, no one spoke. 50 guests stood frozen in place, champagne flutes half raised, conversations unfinished, the weight of what they'd just witnessed settling over the garden like a heavy fog. Then my mother stepped forward and put her arm around my shoulders. I'm proud of you, she said quietly. Your grandmother would be too. Something inside me finally loosened. For the first time in months, I took a full breath. Grant was denied bail that night. Flight risk, the judge said. Between his gambling debts and the people he owed money to, there was too much chance he'd disappear. The irony wasn't lost on me. The man who had built his entire life around controlling narratives, manipulating outcomes, and staying 3 steps ahead had finally run out of places to hide. The fallout came quickly. The morning after the party, Grant's affair partner, his assistant, resigned from the firm by email. She didn't clean out her desk, didn't say goodbye to anyone. She vanished. Rats, I learned, leave sinking ships faster than most people realize. Grant's firm completed their internal investigation within 2 weeks. $53,000 confirmed missing. They filed their own criminal charges. His former client base evaporated overnight. Trust, once broken, doesn't regenerate. The woman from Boston, Caroline Ashford, came forward publicly after the arrest. 5 years of silence, fueled by embarrassment and self-blame, finally ended. Her statement added another layer to the case prosecutors were building. Grant Mercer hadn't made one mistake. He'd built a career on them. The divorce moved faster than I thought possible. There was nothing left to negotiate. The prenuptial agreement Grant had planned to weaponize against me worked entirely in my favor. 8 months of documented infidelity. Fraud. Conspiracy. Embezzlement. The clause he'd counted on became his undoing. Not that he had anything left to give. Everything he claimed to own was borrowed, stolen, or imaginary. The criminal case didn't drag on. Molly Brennan testified. The embryologist cooperated in exchange for reduced charges. Derek Sykes gave his statement. The paper trail Grant thought he'd hidden unraveled with embarrassing ease. Each charge stuck. Each carried years. His parents stopped attending court after the first week. His father released a brief statement saying Grant had made choices no parent could defend. His mother checked into what people politely call a facility for exhaustion. Sometimes reality hits harder than denial can absorb. Grant Mercer, the man who'd walked into my life 4 years earlier with charm and carefully rehearsed sincerity, would spend the next several years in prison. When he eventually got out, he'd have nothing. No money. No career. No family willing to acknowledge him. No future targets who wouldn't find his criminal record with a simple search. The trap he'd built so patiently had snapped shut on his own neck. My baby was born 4 months after the party. Healthy. Perfect. Innocent. Some people asked if I planned to contact Derek Sykes, include him somehow. I thought about it carefully. Derek was a 28-year-old graduate student who'd made a bad decision for money he desperately needed. He wasn't ready to be a father. He didn't want to be. And I didn't need him to be. My child would have me. Would have my mother, finally back in my life where she belonged. Would have the Wilson family, the legacy my grandmother built over decades of love and work. That was more than enough. Family, I learned, isn't about DNA. It isn't about blood tests or biology or matching genetic codes on a piece of paper. Family is about who shows up, who stays, who chooses you every single day, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. My mother chose me when I didn't deserve it. I chose my baby when the circumstances were complicated. That's what family actually means. We have lunch together every week now, making up for 2 lost years, one conversation at a time. She never once said, "I told you so." Not once. Eventually, I asked her why. She set down her coffee cup and smiled. "Because watching you take down that man," she said, "was more satisfying than any 4 words could ever be." 3 weeks after the party, early one morning, I sat alone in my grandmother's kitchen. My kitchen now. Sunlight poured through windows that had watched 4 generations of Wilson women live their lives. I made myself a cup of chamomile tea, her recipe, her favorite brand. Some traditions are worth keeping. My phone buzzed on the counter. "Lunch tomorrow?" "Always," I typed back. Outside, the gardens were in full bloom. The roses my grandmother planted when she was newly married. The hydrangeas she added when my mother was born. The lavender border I helped install when I was 10 years old, my small hands pressing dirt around each seedling while she told me stories about our family. I placed my hand on my belly and felt my baby move. Grant Mercer tried to take everything from me. My money, my reputation, my future, my peace. All he really did was show me exactly how strong I'd always been. Some people spend their entire lives waiting for karma to arrive. I was lucky. I didn't have to wait. I got to deliver mine in person, with documentation, witnesses, and handcuffs. My grandmother used to say that Wilson women don't break. We bend, we adapt, we survive. And when someone tries to burn us down, we rise from the ashes and build something better. Grant thought he married an easy target. He married a Wilson. If this story moved you, shocked you, or made you feel even a little less alone, don't keep it to yourself. Hit the **** button so more people can find it. *** subscribe. *** for more real gripping stories like this one. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? And what part of this story stayed with you the most? More stories are already waiting for you on your screen. Click one now. You won't want to miss what happens next.